True Abandoned Houses Horror Stories. The first story, The Shadows of Forgotten Homes. I had always been drawn to the eerie, the unexplained, the abandoned. My obsession with the macabre and the unknown had led me to a unique hobby, exploring forgotten places. Abandoned houses, in particular, held a special fascination for me. There was something about the desolation, the history, and the mystery of these places that called to me. One crisp autumn afternoon, I received an email that would set in motion a series of events I could never have anticipated. The email was cryptic, containing only a single sentence: "You seek the abandoned seeks you." It was signed with a name I didn't recognize, and the sender's address was a jumble of letters and numbers. An odd sensation swept over me, a combination of dread and intrigue. I couldn't help but wonder if someone had been watching my explorations or had caught wind of my obsession. The email gnawed at me for days, like an itch that refused to be scratched. Eventually, curiosity won out, and I decided to reply with a simple, "Who are you?" Almost immediately, I received a response. This time, the message contained an address and nothing else. It was an address I had never heard of before, a place so remote that it barely registered on any map. It was in a desolate, forested area on the outskirts of a forgotten town named Ravenswood. Driven by equal parts curiosity and fear, I packed my gear and set out on a rainy Saturday morning, the gloomy weather seemingly fitting for the ominous quest ahead. As I approached Ravenswood, I couldn't help but notice that the town had an eerie aura of abandonment about it. The streets were empty, and the few buildings that stood had an air of decay and neglect. Finally, I arrived at the address provided in the email. It led me to a winding dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere. The forest closed in around me, the trees whispering secrets in the wind, and the air felt heavy with the presence of the unknown. I parked my car and made my way deeper into the woods, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of leaves on the ground. After a long hike, I emerged into a small clearing, and there it stood, the abandoned house. It was a decrepit, two-story structure with peeling paint, boarded-up windows, and a sagging porch. Vines crawled up its walls, and the roof sagged under the weight of moss and decay. The moment I laid eyes on the house, I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was as if the very building itself was watching me, waiting for me. But I was determined to uncover the secrets it held. As I approached the porch, a chill wind blew through the trees, causing the leaves to rustle and creating a symphony of eerie whispers. I pushed open the creaking front door, revealing a dark, dusty interior. My flashlight cut through the inky blackness, revealing a scene frozen in time. The furniture was draped in tattered sheets, as if the previous inhabitants had left in a hurry, never to return. Family photos hung crooked on the walls, their subjects long forgotten. A sense of abandonment and loss permeated the air. With each step, I felt the presence of something unseen, something that didn't want me there. I had always been cautious during my explorations, but this place was different. The silence was oppressive, and the darkness seemed to reach out for me, attempting to pull me into its depths. I made my way up the creaking staircase, the wood groaning beneath my feet. The second floor was just as eerie as the first, with closed doors leading to unknown rooms. I chose one at random and turned the handle, revealing a bedroom frozen in time. A child's bed, covered in a thick layer of dust, dominated the room. Toys were scattered on the floor, and faded posters adorned the walls. My flashlight caught a glint of something beneath the bed, and I crouched down to investigate. I pulled out an old, weathered journal. It was filled with the writings of a young girl, detailing her life in the house, her hopes, and her growing sense of foreboding. She mentioned whispers in the night, shadows in the corners, and a feeling that something was watching her. The entries grew darker as time went on. She wrote of sleepless nights, of doors that opened on their own, and of a looming dread that she couldn't shake. The final entry simply read, "They're here." I shivered, feeling a connection with the girl who had once lived in this forsaken place. The journal had given me a glimpse into the past, but it had also deepened the sense of unease that had settled over me. I couldn't ignore the possibility that the email I had received had been sent by someone who knew about the house's dark history. I continued to explore the house, room by room, each one revealing more of its secrets. In the basement, I found a collection of old, decayed books on occult rituals and dark magic. It was as if someone had tried to summon something beyond the veil of the living, and I couldn't help but wonder if their actions had led to the house's abandonment. As the day waned and the house's secrets unfolded, I found myself drawn deeper into its mysteries. The shadows seemed to come to life, twisting and contorting in strange, unnatural ways. Whispers echoed through the empty rooms, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Finally, I entered the attic, the darkest and most foreboding space of all. The room was suffused with an otherworldly gloom, and I hesitated at the top of the stairs. I could hear faint, mournful cries, like the wails of the forgotten. I reached the attic's threshold and shone my flashlight into the room. What I saw made my blood run cold. The attic was filled with dozens of figures, their forms barely discernible in the dim light. They were spectral, their faces twisted in agony, and their eyes were empty voids. The figures moved closer, their mournful cries growing louder, filling the room with an oppressive sense of despair. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and as I turned to flee, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face among the spectral crowd, the young girl from the journal. In that moment, I knew the truth. The abandoned house was a prison for the lost souls who had once lived there, trapped in a never-ending nightmare. They were bound to the place, unable to move on to the afterlife, and they had been waiting for someone like me to set them free. I ran down the attic stairs and out of the house, my heart pounding in my chest. The moment I stepped outside, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the dark, looming presence of the house seemed to recede. The forest was once again filled with the rustling of leaves, and the whispers were gone. I drove away from Ravenswood, leaving the abandoned house behind, and I couldn't help but wonder about the email that had brought me to that place. Had it been a warning or a plea for help from the lost souls trapped within? I may never know the answer, but one thing was certain: would never forget the haunted house in the forgotten town of Ravenswood, a place where the shadows of forgotten homes held more than just memories, they held the souls of the lost. The second story, The House That Time Forgot. My obsession with abandoned houses had always been a peculiar quirk of mine. I found beauty in the decay, and I was fascinated by the stories these forsaken places held within their walls. So when I heard about the Wickham House, a decrepit mansion shrouded in mystery and dread, I knew I had to explore it. The tales surrounding the Wickham House were shrouded in legend and horror. It stood alone on a desolate hill, far from any sign of civilization. Its architecture was an amalgamation of Gothic and Victorian, but time had not been kind. The once vibrant red bricks were now a muted gray, and the imposing turrets and balconies had become sagging, skeletal remnants of a forgotten era. As I approached the house, I couldn't help but feel the weight of its history. I had heard whispers of curses, of a tragic family that had met an untimely end, and of a malevolent force that was said to still linger within the decaying walls. The door hung ajar, inviting me into the abyss of the Wickham House. I took a deep breath and crossed the threshold, my flashlight piercing the gloom that clung to the interior. The air was stale, heavy with the weight of time, and the silence was profound, as if the house itself held its breath. The first room I entered was a grand foyer, once adorned with intricate wallpaper that had long lost its luster. A dilapidated chandelier dangled precariously from the ceiling. The room was furnished with decaying relics from a bygone era, and the dust lay thick on every surface. I moved deeper into the house, exploring the rooms one by one. Each space unveiled a new layer of its haunting history. There was a parlor with moth-eaten furniture, a dining room with rotting food still on the table, and a library filled with books whose pages had turned to ash. It was as if the inhabitants had fled in haste, leaving everything behind to succumb to the ravages of time. The second floor was equally haunting, with ornate bedrooms that had once been the sanctuaries of a family now lost to history. The walls held faded portraits and the musty scent of old memories. In one room, I found a child's nursery, its walls adorned with scenes of whimsical animals. Toys lay scattered on the floor, and a broken crib stood in the corner. It was a room frozen in time, a poignant reminder of a past abruptly halted. As I continued my exploration, a feeling of unease crept over me. It wasn't just the oppressive silence or the shiver that ran down my spine, it was the palpable sense that something was watching, waiting. I had always been cautious in my explorations, but the Wickham House was different. The shadows seemed to pulse and shift in unnatural ways, and the air grew heavy with a malevolent presence that I ascended the grand staircase to the attic, a place often rumored to be the epicenter of the house's darkness. The wood groaned beneath my footsteps, and the flickering light of my flashlight cast eerie, dancing shadows. The attic was filled with old trunks and forgotten mementos. Among them, I discovered a box of letters and journals, all bearing the Wickham family name. The entries revealed the tragic history of the house. The Wickham family had fallen victim to a series of misfortunes. Deaths, illnesses, and financial ruin had befallen them, leading to a growing desperation that had left them vulnerable to dark influences. One entry spoke of a mysterious visitor who had offered to restore their fortunes in exchange for an unspeakable pact. The final journal was chilling. It detailed the family's descent into madness, the tormented whispers that filled the night, and the rituals they had performed in a futile attempt to break the malevolent force's grip on their lives. The last entry simply read, "We are lost." As I closed the final journal, a cold gust of wind blew through the attic, extinguishing my flashlight. Darkness closed in around me, and the attic seemed to come to life. Whispers filled the air, a cacophony of tormented voices. The shadows twisted and contorted, coalescing into a spectral form. It was a figure, gaunt and wretched, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. "You should not have come," it hissed, its voice a chilling, otherworldly whisper. "This place is beyond your understanding." I stumbled back, fumbling for a light source. When my flashlight pierced the darkness once more, the attic had changed. The walls were covered in sinister, arcane symbols that seemed to writhe and shift. The spectral figure had vanished, but the room was no longer empty. An old mirror stood against one wall, its surface tarnished and cracked. I approached it cautiously, the mirror revealing a reflection that was not my own. Instead, it showed a scene of unimaginable horror. The attic was filled with shadowy figures, their faces contorted in anguish, and they reached out toward me with spectral hands. Panic surged through me, and I turned to flee, but the attic had become a labyrinth, its corridors twisting and shifting to confound me. Hours turned to days as I wandered the endless maze, the malevolent presence growing stronger with each passing moment. My only respite came when I discovered a hidden door, concealed behind a bookshelf in a hidden corner of the attic. It led to a small, windowless chamber, its walls adorned with eerie symbols and a stone altar at its center. The altar bore the stains of rituals, and I could sense the malevolence that had taken root within this cursed space. As I stepped into the chamber, the symbols on the walls began to glow, and a sinister, disembodied voice filled the air. It spoke of a curse that had bound the Wickham family to the house, a curse that now sought to claim me as its own. "Join us," the voice hissed, and I felt a cold, searing pain. The world began to spin, and I knew I was no longer in control of my own fate. When I awoke, I was back in the grand foyer of the Wickham House, my body feeling strangely numb. The malevolence that had haunted me had dissipated, and the house was once again silent and still. I stumbled outside, leaving the malevolent presence behind in the depths of the house. As I drove away from the Wickham House, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had become a part of its dark history, a living ghost bound to its malevolence for all eternity. The house had claimed me, just as it had claimed the Wickham family, and I was left to wander in a world that would never be the same.